Hello, neighbor. My name is Robert J. Ray. I'm a professional counseling therapist and trainer of trainers. I worked in a mental health prison for 11 years. I have fixed a lot of broken men and women in my 45 years as a counseling therapist. I was born in Maria, Mississippi and graduated from the famous T.J. Harris High School in 1963. T.J. Harris played Brinkley and Jim Hill in football and basketball every year before that stumbling block of integration dissembled the black race. I ran for mayor of Meridian in 2021. I ran for governor of Mississippi in 2019. I'm Robert J. Ray, the man with all of the answers, every Monday at 4 p.m. Watch me on WeBelieve.global. Hello, neighbor. Welcome to the Robert J. Ray Show, the man with all of the answers. This week, I'm going to be talking about the man that mastered all known knowledge in the universe. And hey, this is going to be a double molly whopper. Because I know a lot of you have one or two people that you think that know so much, and you hero worship them, and they're just really dealing in fly specks, according to Emanuel Swedenborg and what he did. When I first got in contact with Emanuel Swedenborg, I was training out at the organism, and there was a guy that was in training. And he asked me, had I read this certain book by Wilson Van Dusen called The Natural Depths in Man? And I said, no. So he said, he brought it to me, and I started reading the book. And he had a lot of good things to say, Wilson Van Dusen did. But at the end of his chapters and at the beginning of chapters, he had these quotes. And I say, that's the individual that I should be reading. And that individual happened to be Emanuel Swedenborg, the man that mastered all known knowledge. Now, I brought my reading glass. I'm going to do a lot of reading today, but we have to, because once you kind of see what this man have done and what he did, then you're going to be wondering, why did I not know about this individual? Because when I read the first book, when I contacted the foundation about Emanuel Swedenborg, this is the first book that they brought me was Swedenborg, Life and Teaching. I read this book. This here put me on another level. And I wonder, why didn't anybody know about this guy? I mean, he did everything. And before the show is over, I'm going to show you a lot of people who did read Emanuel Swedenborg and did grow from Emanuel Swedenborg. Now, Emanuel Swedenborg, he was the world's greatest genius. He mastered all known knowledge. And his inventions started the Industrial Revolution. You remember learning that in school? The Industrial Revolution, that was a big deal over in Europe. It started over there. They had mills, they had all kind of machine shops and all of these things that was making all type of industrial things. And Emanuel Swedenborg was the one who started creating these inventions so that everybody could benefit from it. And this is what he did. Nobody ever said anything about Emanuel Swedenborg when you talk about school and the Industrial Revolution. He was a light bringer, the way of showers of humanity. When he was born, his father gazed up to the stars and said, hey, this is going to be Emmanuel, in which that means that it's God with us. And as we get deep on into Emanuel Swedenborg, you'll see that he and God had a real special relationship. Now, Emanuel Swedenborg, he entered college at the age of 10. Can you imagine that? And he stayed in the college, and when he was 20, he had just about mastered all the knowledge that they had was teaching people at that point in time. And he studied Newton. You remember Sir Isaac Newton? He was the guy that was the apple was supposed to drop on his head, and he figured out gravity. But he did a lot of other things Newton did about space and stuff. But nobody has ever touched the things that Emanuel Swedenborg did. He invented things like how to raise a ship. He invented something like that, a device to raise a ship. He invented a machine gun. This was back in the 1700s. And it was shoot 70 shots before you had to reload it. And then he showed that he invented a flying machine. 200 years before the Wright brothers was even a gleam in their daddy's eye, he had showed that, hey, a plane could fly, and he showed how it would fly. the tail of it, what had to happen, the wings, the aerions, and all of these things. Hey, and if you don't believe it, it's on at the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. He did all of these things way back in the 1700s. And when he was the first one to find out the longitude at sea at nighttime. They could find the latitude, but the longitude, which go from east to west, nobody discovered how to read the longitude when they was out at sea. And so a lot of times they would have to stop until the sun came up. But Emanuel Swedenborg, he figured out a way to read the longitude at night by the moon. He did that. And then when it was all said and done, they said that Emanuel Swedenborg's longitude device was as close and was the best one that anybody had ever tried to put out. And that was a big thing because you was out at sea at night and hey, you didn't know where you was going. You would have to stop because you couldn't get the longitude. But Emanuel Swedenborg invented that, the longitude. And after he accomplished all of these things, the scientific things, and he did a lot of it. Let me read you a few things that he did when he was in science. He first to propound the nubular hypotheses, made discoveries in leading the science of crystallology, developed theories of nature of energy, discovered that the brain functions in synchronization with the lungs. Can you imagine that? Didn't anybody know that? But now you know that it's synchronization with the lung because if you get choked or if you pass out, the first thing they start to do is they start to give you CPR. And that is pressing your chest down, trying to get your heart to beat, and they will blow into your mouth to try to get that oxygen going to your brain. So he was the first one to come up with that synchronization. Another thing, discovered the function of the ductless glands, deduced the use of cerebrospinal fluid, pioneered in the study of magnetism. You know, magnetism is what causes people to see UFOs at nighttime. It's the magnetism. And if the magnetism is right, then you can spot a UFO. That's what causes people to be able to see it, is the magnetism. Another thing he did was he made the first sketch of the glider pipe, wrote the first book on algebra in Swedish, hypothesized numerous galaxies and stars. That's what Newton was doing. He was trying to do that. But Emanuel Swedenborg did it. Did research that led to the development of geological science in Sweden, pioneered work in metallurgy. Now, these were just some of the things that he did, and just a few things he do. I'm going to share some more things with you. But just think, now here's a man that did all of this, and you went through school, you learned about Halley. You remember Halley's Comet? Yeah, he knew Halley personally. He studied under Halley and them. And Halley is famous for Halley's Comet. Just one thing. Just one thing that he's famous for. But they did make him famous. But Emanuel Swedenborg, they kept it a secret. The psychologists and all of these, the theologians and all of these big-time psychologists and psychiatrists of his time, they didn't want people to know about Swedenborg because a lot of things that they did, they had got it from Emanuel Swedenborg. And they became famous for it. For they definitely didn't want anyone to know about Emanuel Swedenborg. Now, in 1743, he began the search for the soul. Can you imagine an individual having a gall to want to search for the soul? But the reason he did this is because a lot of people at this time in the 1700s, people didn't really believe in God. They didn't believe in the church. Yeah, and the scientists definitely did not believe in a God. So he figured that if he could find the soul and get that in order so that everybody could see, hey, there is a soul, so there must be a God and there must be something other than the human body. But he was trying to search for the soul, but it was impossible for him to search for the whole by doing anatomy. And that's where he was going at. He was going into the body like they do an autopsy on you. And they go in and they look at your brain and they look at your liver and they look at all of your internal organs. And then they try to determine what killed you, what was your death. Emanuel Swedenborg was doing all of this stuff, and he made some wonderful discoveries in searching for the soul, but it was all about the natural, all about the body. Now, the reason that he could not find the soul is because the soul is superior and spiritual. It's like the monster, Frankenstein monster, trying to psychoanalyze Dr. Frankenstein. He couldn't do it. He would be laying on the couch, Dr. Frankenstein would be laying on the couch, and the monster sitting there like the psychiatrist, and Dr. Frankenstein would be telling me, well, yeah, I wanted to be famous. I wanted to feel what it was like to be God when I created you, and to make myself a name and be rich and all of this stuff like that. And the monster would just sit there and listen. And, well, come to think of it, that's all that psychiatrists do anyway. We won't use that example. But anyway, when he was searching for the soul, he couldn't find it. But when he began to go into the spiritual realm, and the reason that he went into the spiritual realm is that he continued to want to search for the soul, but he couldn't find it. So he wondered, how am I going to do that? So one night, he was over in England, and he was having a dinner at a restaurant with the other big, heavy thinkers and the scientists that was trying to get themselves known and get themselves famous. And he had a vision, and that vision was of the infinite man Jesus, and Jesus did visit him that particular night when he was at the restaurant. And in that vision, he seen the infinite man Jesus, and the first thing that the infinite man said to him is not to eat so much, or not to eat too much. And we were wondering what that meant. Here it is, God is talking to the man, and the first thing he tell him is not to eat too much. But as we found out later, what that meant is that he didn't want Emanuel Swedenborg to be sucking in all of that natural knowledge that's really not going to be any good to you after you leave this world. And he was just sucking it up. And he did. He had sucked up a whole lot of it. But when the infinite man came to him and had a job for him to do, then he told him, say, hey, forget about all of this worldly knowledge, all this scientific stuff. And when it get right down to it, it's really nothing. Science and all of these different things you learn in school, when it get right down to it, it really doesn't get you anything. It doesn't make you happy. It might make you a few dollars if you come up with something that someone else hasn't come up with, and that's what scientists usually do. Each one of them try to come up with something. Each doctor try to come up with some kind of pharmaceutical chemical that will make him famous and make him rich. And that's all it's for. So the infinite man, Jesus, told him, say, hey, not to eat too much. And after that, Emanuel Swedenborg began to start thinking about doing spiritual things. He started reading interpreting the Bible and all of these religious books that had been written in all the different religions. He read all of those, Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, all of those. He read through them to see what exactly that people could get out of these religious books and these religions. And after he read so much, that the infinite man decided to intromit him into the world of spirits. Now, neighbor, listen. Intromit into the world of spirits. Remember that. The next time that somebody starts talking to you about, well, I talk to the dead, and a lot of people are making money right today by saying that they can talk to the dead. But you don't have to buy into that, because as we found out through reading the writings of Emanuel Swedenborg, that they speak a whole different language in the spiritual world. It's a spiritual language. So if they speak in a spiritual language, then the natural language can't communicate with them at all. But you see these people saying they're communicating with the dead to try to relieve you of your money. But Emanuel Swedenborg was the only one since the beginning of creation that have been permitted by the Lord to be intromitted into that world. We'll be right back. The Black American race is the only race in the USA who do not have connate rational minds to pass down to their offspring, which means the black baby boys being born today will not have their precious gem to compete with all the other races for their piece of the American dream. Why is it that other races can enter the USA with little or nothing and in a few years have more than the black race? The reason: no rational mind. You have to have a rational mind to operate a business and make it pay. The Black and White Race Rationale by Robert J. Ray. Available on Amazon. Get your copy today. Hello, welcome back, neighbor. And like we've said, I was talking about Emanuel Swedenborg, and I love to talk about Emanuel Swedenborg because he was the man. He's the reason that I can say that I know so much. I mean, it's just like they put the Atlantic Ocean in your brain, in my mind, and then after that, you can put the Pacific Ocean in there. That's just how magnificent the brain is. It will never run out of space to put knowledge in there. Now, Emanuel Swedenborg being intromitted into the spiritual world, for the last 27 years of his life, he was permitted to walk in that world every day. When he wake up in the morning, he would walk out, maybe eat his breakfast, and then walk out in there and walk right on and be in that spiritual world with spirits and angels and devils, and he was able to talk to all of those individuals. Now, he told me about one part of hell. I know y'all always want to know. You think you know about heaven, but you don't ever know about hell. I'm going to tell you one little thing that I read in the writings about hell. Hell is not a place where it's fire and brimstone and stuff like that. Hell is just an infernal prison. Emanuel Swedenborg said it's just a lot of different prisons where they put people, they put the murderers over in this hell here, along with all the rest of the murderers. They put the rapists all over in here with the rest of the rapists. And I thought that, and before I read Swedenborg, I said that would be the thing to do. And that's what they should do in prison. Put all of the ones that rape, they put them together. And this is what they do in the spiritual world. Now, the hell that he spoke, that I read about I read about a lot of them, but this one will probably be more interesting to people, is that it was a cave. And this cave, when you go in there, it had spirits in there, male spirits in there. And they were overseen by a punishing spirit or a guarding spirit. And they had jobs to do, and they would give them little rewards, and you would be okay as long as you didn't try to do anything to your neighbor. See, like these prisons here, you go in those and you can do things to your neighbor and punish them and abuse them, and not too much is going to be done to you. But over there, if you abuse your neighbor or try to take what he has or steal from him, then they drop you down to a deeper hell, for you to learn to be more neighborly. But this particular hell, they said, Emanuel Swedenborg said, that they had the spirits in there to be working, and they would go to work, and they would work for a length of time, and to earn whatever little things they give, a little bobbits, or maybe a little money or whatever they love was. And then after they worked, then later on they could go further back in the cave, and it was females back there. Okay, you get that? They was able to go back there and pick out a female that was in hell too. They was in hell also, and you got a lot of females end up in hell also. A lot of whores and things, prostitutes and stuff like this. They end up, and they could go back there in that little further in that cave, and they could pick them out, one female. But once they pick out that female, they had to remain with that one female, and they could go on and and do whatever they wanted to do with the female. Now that's a merciful God that does that. He's not going to let you burn in no fire. He wants to take care of you just as well as he can with who you are. If you was too demonic to be in heaven, you can be in hell. But he gives you little lights of enlightenment and little things of love and things that you like to do. And that's just one of the hells that you can read about in reading the writings of Emanuel Swedenborg. And the book is called Heaven and Hell. You can go into that book and you can read a lot about where Emanuel Swedenborg spent a lot of the last 27 years of his life in this world. He was in that world also. Now, I'm going to tell you some of the things that Emanuel Swedenborg did and what he wrote. He wrote something like the Minor Principia, the Principia, Infinite Final Cause of Creation. Now, this was a heavy book. Now, what was the reason for the infinite and final cause of creation? What would you think? Yeah, but you would want to know, wouldn't you? Well, the reason that it was created, the universe was created, is so that could be a heaven from the human race. That was the whole issue. That's why the divine man, when he decided to create a universe so that people could be in heaven and so they could be loving and learn to love and learn to receive and give love to the neighbor. Wouldn't that be something? If you was in a place like that where no one was trying to be the best, the mostest, or the greatest, but everybody was trying to be a neighbor to everybody else. Wouldn't that be? That's what heaven is. And you don't have that in the world. But you have people that want to do good to the neighbor, and people out there today trying to do things that will help other people in their life and be more comfort and be more joyous in their life. Because people like to give. It's a human thing to want to help other people and give. And children do it all the time. They hear about people over in the Africa not having enough to eat. I saw a little girl the other day, about 10, 11. She went out and gathered up all kinds of money for food, to send food in school. No, what it was desks. That's what she said. She had got these desks you could put together, and she was going to send all of these desks, and people was helping them, giving them money. They sent all these over into these countries where they had school, but they didn't have any desks. And these desks could be assembled, and they could be used as desks. Little kids, they like to do this. I've seen that on TV so many times where little kids would come up with an idea to help somebody, to help other kids, and they would follow through on it until somebody would listen and somebody would give them some help. Because, as you remember, when they told Jesus, hey, he said, no, don't worry about the kids coming to me. Say, because in heaven, those are the ones that are in heaven. And that's what it is. It's just like you're a little kid in heaven, but you're grown up. But to the infinite man, he's the father, and heaven is your mother. So you are actually a child in heaven, and you just like it. You want to help out the neighbor. You want to do what's best for the neighbor. Anything you could do to make anybody else's feelings happy and joyous, that's what you want to do. And this is what the whole universe was created to do. And this is why there is a heaven from the human race, but there's also a hell. Now, let me just tell you a few other things. He worked in all of these scientific things: chemistry, hydrodynamics, mechanics, magnetics, mathematics, pneumatics, geology, anatomy, astronomy, hydraulics, optics, metallurgics, acoustics, physiology, cosmogony, dynamics. Now, just think, if you was in any of these things here, and you read what Emanuel Swedenborg had said about it and written about it, you would be the top. You would be the tops in it. Just like I'm the top person in doing counseling and therapy and alcoholism and drug therapy. You know why? Because I read Emanuel Swedenborg, Rational Psychology. The things I learned in that book is like if I come into a room of people, I could almost look at their facial expression, the way they move, the way they move their arms, and I could almost tell what they were into. I could almost tell whether they was a criminal type or if they was more loving or into a hatred. It's because I learned that from reading Emanuel Swedenborg, Rational Psychology. And then he had another book, Empirical Psychology. I read that. And that just tells you everything about how the internal brain and all of that work and how it all affects the body, the rest of the body. That's why I'm the authority on doing counseling and therapy, way above any psychiatrist, way above any psychologist, way above any ministers or anything like that, because of what I learned from reading the writings of Emanuel Swedenborg. So this is what happens when you get hooked into Emanuel Swedenborg. Some other things he did in the Theological. He wrote a 12-volume Arcana Celestia, Apocalyptic Experience. Arcana Celestia, that means that he explained and went through Genesis all the way through the Old Testament. Can you imagine that? That was some volumes. That's 12 volumes of that. And if you ever get around to it before you die, see if you can try to read it. I done read 4 of them. I'm going to try to read all 12 before. He did Apocalyptic Explain. This was about Revelation. He explained everything in Revelation. Once he was intromitted into the spiritual world, he was able to learn all of these things, not from any angels or anybody, but from the infinite man, Jesus himself. There are heaven and hell. That's the one I mentioned a while ago. The 4 doctrines, divine love and wisdom. I read that several times. Divine providence. Divine love and wisdom tell you how everything was created. How it was how everything has 3 degrees in it. Did you know? Who would have known that? I would have never known. Everything has 3 degrees in it. Your body, your human body has 3 degrees in it. 3 levels of brain. In your brain, you got a lower level, a middle level, and an upper level of the brain. And a lot of people never move out of the first step in their brain. They never move out of that. They never go up to the second where it's beautiful. And hardly anybody ever move up into the 3rd degree of their brain, because you would have to be too magnanimous to do that. Now, when you are... Here's another one, Divine Providence. I've read that several times. Divine Providence was a book Emanuel Swedenborg wrote that tells why things happen, why people die at certain ages. Can you imagine that? No, I know that. I know why some die as a baby, some die as an adolescent, some die as teenagers, some die as adults, and some don't die until they get to be old age. Now, how would you like to know that? That's why when it was a little 12-year-old girl that died yesterday, they was telling me about. And why would you think that a 12-year-old girl would be dying? But the writings tell you that there are certain spirits are with these individuals, and they are needed in the world of spirits. The reason that children are needed over there is because there has to be a balance. Just look at this. It's so many church people, Christians and all other religions, that's going to hell when they get over there. To the hells of swelling, So they say that hell's a swole with Christians. That's what the writings say. That's what Emanuel Swedenborg said. Now that's something to know. And the Christians are the ones that they think that they going straight on to heaven when they die. But once they read the writings of Emanuel Swedenborg, they'll find out that that's really not true. It's more to it than that. Now, the reason that he has to have more children to die and come into the spiritual world is that the hell and heaven, it has to be a balance. There has to be always a balance of hell and heaven. If there any balance get out of order, the infinite man will bring another one right in. And since the hells are swelling so, you need more angels. And since children become angels when they come into the spiritual world, that's why so many of them have to die, is to balance it out. It's because the adults that's going into the spiritual world, they are filling up the hell, and we got to have that balance back. That's why so many kids have to die, and to get that balance in there. Now, you would say, well, what about kids over there? Emanuel Swedenborg say kids over there, can't anyone touch them. They can put to flight 10,000 evil spirits. That's how much power they have through the infinite man. All of this stuff is in the writings of Emanuel Swedenborg, and y'all should try to read some of it sometime. You might not understand it all, but just know that the man Emanuel Swedenborg is doing his best to get you to understand that it's more to life than just material things and money and power and fame. It's much more to it. Hey, I'll be right back with some more Emanuel Swedenborg. Y'all niggas was born into a faith-only religion. Baptist, Methodist, Holiness, or Catholic. But y'all have one thing in common, believing that faith only will save you. Y'all were taught to believe that Jesus died on the cross for your sins, and y'all bought into it without questioning whether it was genuinely true or not. Just because your parents introduced you into it, but don't blame them so much as the false preachers who preached this false Nicene Council 325 AD doctrine. The Nigger's Holy Bible by Robert J. Ray, available on Amazon. Get your copy today. Welcome back, neighbor. And as I go on with Emanuel Swedenborg, I know I'm not gonna get it all in today, but just listen to what I'm saying, and then maybe go look at the video again. Now, he wrote another book called Conjugal Love. That was one of my favorite ones he read, because you know why? Because that tells about all of the love that a man and a woman goes through. It tells you about all of the good and true love, the married love, how fornication takes place, and then it goes into scortatory love. See, you haven't ever heard of that before. I know you haven't. Scortatory love is all the hellish love. This is all of the lust that men and women go through in the world. And it tells about all of the fornication, adultery, violations, rape, and all of these things, deflowering virgins. That book, I mean, it just opened up. Now, whenever I go and counsel married couples, I know exactly what to do. When I listen to this one in individual counseling, and then I'll listen to the other married person in individual counseling, and I'll know exactly what's wrong with that marriage. Yeah, and then when I bring them back together, then I have them to confront each other about what I found out about each one of them. And once you find out about what you really brought to the marriage, and a lot of times the individual only brought the love of the sex, he didn't love what his wife, he didn't love her manners, he didn't love what her affections was. He just loved the body, the sex. And when you do that, that marriage don't last long. I learned all of that in reading the book Conjugal Love. I mean, it just enlightens you as to what relationship. So when I did marriage counseling, I either got the individuals together and they remain together, and they begin to change, and they begin to see each other in a different light, and they begin to play their role in that marriage, their genuine, true role in the marriage. And I've seen some later on, and they were just as happy as they could be. But first, they had to find out what was the defect in the marriage, and then that's what I would find out when I would talk to each one of them about what did they bring, and what did they love about the other person, what they didn't like about the other person. And once we seen that, and then sometime I would get them back together, and they would see then that they didn't have any business being together. Because a lot of times the male, he just saw she was pretty in face and loved the sex. But then after having the sex for so many times, it's like anything else. It becomes too common, and then you get pushed away, and then the next thing you know, you're out cheating. And then that's one thing about cheating that I found out, that men don't really know when they get married, and then they go out and cheat on their wife. They are making a whore out of their wife. They going out having sex with these whores, and then the next thing you know, people are calling your wife, he has his whore at home too. See, she becomes the laughing stock. So men, when you go out and cheat on your wife, just know that you are getting ready to turn her into a whore too. Because just because you come back to the house and set up housekeeping and stuff, the society know you. They see what you're doing, and then they be saying, "Well, that's not his wife. If it was his wife, he would be true to her. That's just his whore that he keeps at home with him." Do you want your woman that you love, that's going to be the mother of your children, being talked about that in the society and in the community? But this is what happened, and I learned all of that from reading Emanuel Swedenborg, Conjugal Love. I mean, it's an amazing book. You got to get it and you got to read it. And The True Christian Religion, that's 2 volumes. That's what the Infinite Man came to Emanuel Swedenborg that night in the cafe. And that's what he wanted him to do. He told him that he had a work for him to do. And he was going to tell him everything to write, and he was going to let him into the spiritual world, and he was going to be able to go all over the heavens, all over the hells, and all over the world of spirits. Anywhere that he had a desire to go, he would be able to go there, and he would be under the protection of the Infinite Man. And he did that, and he came back, and he would come back to this world, and he would write. And he wrote all of these volumes of books, people. I'm telling you, it ain't nothing like it in the world. Let me see something else he did. Philosophical Principles in Anatomy, a record of experiences in the spiritual realm. That record in the spiritual realm, I've read, though, is 5 volumes that he was in the spiritual world. It's called the Spiritual Diary. You read those things and your mind just be blown away. That this man was able to be over in that world where everybody die and ends up at. But nobody knows anything about it. Nobody knows anything about it. But here's 5 volumes I was reading back in the 70s and 60s. And that just enlightened me up. The things that I learned, the things that he went through, the spirits he met, and the way that they behaved, and all of these things. Yeah, I know that. I know those things. That's why I know that I'll be kind of prepared when I get to the spiritual world. I'll kind of know how it works. It's just like if you was going to another country. Say, for instance, if you was going over to China and you didn't know anything about China but if you had a book to read about China, wouldn't that kind of, break the ice when you got over there? You would kind of know the behavior pattern of the Chinese people, and you would kind of know what the decorum was when you went over there, and you would kind of know how to behave when you got over there. You wouldn't know everything about China, but you would have a good idea of what was going on over in China. Well, these writings of Emanuel Swedenborg, it's just like that. You know you're going to have to go there one of these days. So why not read all you can about that world before you get over there, so that when you do wake up over there, then you'll know some things. You'll know some of the behavior patterns. You'll know the decorum of what happened. You'll know what to be looking for. Because now it's critical when you get over there, because once you get over there, it's not but two places that you're going to end up. It's just two places you're going to end up, and you know what that is. Either it's heaven or either it's hell. So all of these writings that he wrote, I mean, I was so angry when I read the life and teachings of Emanuel Swedenborg. I'm just going to read you. I got to read you this in there. And this is about, this comes from his book, The Worship and Love of God. This is what he said, and this is about the creation. This is how he said it took place. He said, in the world, the atmosphere itself breathed the most grateful temperatures in consequence of receiving so copious a light and heat. At the same time being warmed by fruitful dews exhaled from the bosom of the earth. As yet there was no furious wind, no borealis to disturb the air with its stormy whirlwind, nor as yet did the smallest cloud intercept the splendor of the sun. But the face of everything was serene, and zephyrs only, with their gentle fannings, appeased the murmur of the wind. Now isn't that beautiful? Yeah, isn't that beautiful? Wouldn't that be the way you would want the world to be? And that's the way he said it was in the beginning. In the beginning, this is the way the earth was. Yeah, it wasn't any whirlwinds, any storms, or anything like that. But it was just nice and tranquil, the zephyrs. You know, and I've kind of been out I've experienced that out on our farm in the springtime or summertime, and I would be just walking around out there, you know, maybe going to the fruit orchard, and everything that he described in this book, it would be happening right there to me on that farm. And the zephyr would just blow on your face, and where it would be so invigorating and so pleasurable. And even the chickens would be, instead of them clucking, they would be just as serene. They would be quiet. The dogs would be laying around just as comfortable. And the only thing you would hear is like maybe a bird chirping here and there. And you would just know that it was something higher degree than what we had here in the world. And that was just one thing that I read to you from the writings of Emanuel Swedenborg. I'm going to try to read a couple more before we get out of here. But listen, the reason that Emanuel Swedenborg was so famous and known in Europe and all of those is because people had heard about Emanuel Swedenborg, the man, and they had heard about him, what he did. They knew all of the scientific stuff that he had done. And now they was hearing that he was being intromitted into the world of spirits. And they wanted to know, what was he seeing? What did he do? And there were so many scientists that didn't believe it. It was a lot of them spitting venom on Emanuel Swedenborg's name because he was getting famous and they wasn't. He was doing things, helping people, and they wasn't. They were just trying to become famous so that they could get their just due, they thought, their money and their fame and their power. But Emanuel Swedenborg, no egotism, out of all of these things that he wrote, all the books that he's written. Let me tell you how many languages that he spoke. He spoke Dutch, English, French, German, Hebrew, Greek, Latin, Italian. What did he craft? He made cabinets, he made instruments, engraving, marble inlay, grindings, all of these things. Draft inventions, all of those. Travel over in England, Holland, France, Italy, Germany, all over, learning things, more and more stuff to to make the world a better place for people like us who didn't know anything. We didn't know nothing but fly specks before Emanuel Swedenborg came on the scene. And I just think about all of the people that have lived since Emanuel Swedenborg had been in the world and died. They never even had a clue that it was a man like this in the world. This would be the difference between ending up in hell and ending up in heaven, to tell the truth. It would. And this man here is the one that if you don't ever get to anybody else in this world, you need to get to some of his stuff that he wrote. I used to have, and everybody you would meet, like on the jobs and stuff, they would come running with somebody. This man here knows it. This here, you need to get behind him. This here man knows a lot. And I would say, well, you think he knows as much as Emanuel Swedenborg? He said, well, yeah, he probably doesn't know who is Emanuel Swedenborg anyway. And he was, and the man that they would come, he would be talking about, may have done a couple, 2 or 3 things, may have wrote a book or 2, and may have, said some wise things and stuff. And then I would start telling them what Emanuel Swedenborg done, and he was just, and his face was just drop. And I would go on and on about what Emanuel Swedenborg done. And he would get so to the point that he was being so embarrassed about the person that he brought there that he would turn around and keep walking down, and I would be going behind him. And he did this and this. And I would just do that just to let him know, don't get excited over one man. And a lot of them would come with the preacher. They would say, well, the preacher is the most wisest man I know. And I would say, well, what about Emanuel Swedenborg? You think? And I would run off what Emanuel Swedenborg was doing and what he did. And they would because they couldn't comprehend it. Here, this man did a couple things, go up and preach on Sunday, and preach a couple of verses, and they thought he was the all in all. They were just all on him, just saying, "Oh, this is the holy man. This is my mentor. This is the man that given me my knowledge and stuff." But you could get the knowledge that Emanuel Swedenborg gives you, and you can be the tops in your field. I don't care what it is. I'm the tops in the counseling field and in the alcohol and drugs, and nobody can do what I do in alcohol and drugs. The prison proved it. I'll be right back. Senator James Oliver Eastland, he headed up the U.S. Judiciary Department for many years, the highest judiciary committee of the United States of America. He was my guidance, my superior, protector, and mentor. He did show me how the slick communist Jews was coming into Mississippi and corrupting our blacks, who were only a few generations past being ignorant slaves. Slaves whom had been long supported with home, food, and upkeep until a war released them from so-called slavery into poverty, homelessness, and without assistance. We grew up together. Killer Killing by Larry Ellis. Available on Amazon. Get your copy today. Neighbor, I just gotta read you just one more page. Just bear with me. This here is about how the first individual was born. I know you've heard about Adam and Eve and that. And this is kind of give you an idea of how that took place. How was the first human being created? How was the first anything created? But this is how, in the worship and love of God, how Emanuel Swedenborg explains it. He said, in the midst of the grove was a fruit tree which bore a small egg, most precious, in which, as in a jewel, nature concealed her highest powers. In that egg, pendant on the tree of life and vivified by the supreme mind. All things had been prepared in orderly stages for the firstborn, In the course of time, the fetus broke through the bars of its enclosure and drew air into his nostrils. Around the natal couch stood the inhabitants of heaven, gladdened by the sight of the infant, the hope of the whole human race. He moved his little lips as if to venerate his supreme parent, giving thanks to that workmanship of the world was now completed in himself. Ain't that beautiful? That's the way it was. They say from a branch, from a tree branch. Then, in the course of time, the firstborn wandered into a distant grove and sees in a dream a nymph, which means female, if y'all don't know what nymph is, his future bride. He recognized her as the original of the dream vision, which he had 1,000 times recalled. He tenderly woos her and makes her his bride. Ain't that wonderful? Ain't that a beautiful thing? That gives you an idea. And it may not have happened like that, but it was similar. It had to be similar to that because you had to be created. A human being can't be created just all at one time. It has to go through the stages of the fetus, just like everything, every other baby does. But if there was no female, then it had to go through something. And it told you it had to come through the plants. And that's the way that it was described. Although it might be more to it than that. But you know it had to be something similar to that. Now, getting back to Emanuel Swedenborg and what he was doing when he was intromitted into the spiritual world, and people not believing that he could do that. I'm going to give you some examples of what he did to prove that he was able to go into the spiritual world and talk to those people that had died over there. The first one was about, he had visited Gothenburg, England, and that's about 300 miles from his home in Stockholm, Sweden. So he was at a party, a gathering, just like people gather today. They talk about different stuff. He gathered, and while he was in there enjoying the party with the rest of the people, he all of a sudden had to go outside, and he was outside, and he was just turning kind of white, and he was kind of anxious, and they were saying, "What's wrong? What's wrong, Emanuel?" And he said, "Oh, there was a great fire that had broken out in his neighborhood." Now get it now. Now he's 300 miles from where the fire is taking place. And he's saying, oh, the fire is raging there. And it has already burned up one of my friends' home there. And they was puzzled at, how can you know this? And he would go back in and then he would go back out. He would say, oh, it's getting closer to my place. And he was telling exactly how the fire was burning and what it had burned up and everything. And then after a while he said, thank the Lord, it stopped 3 doors from my house. Now, the people say, yeah, Emanuel Swedenborg, it looked like he done got kind of touched in the head. But the next morning, the governor started getting the news in that there had been a big fire there in Stockholm. And when the news got it and brought it to Gothenburg, it wasn't an iota off of what Emanuel Swedenborg had said about it. And they never could understand how he could do that. See? But he had angels that was telling him exactly what was was going on. He knew that. That fire happened exactly like he said it. That made a legend out of him then. People talked about that for years and years. Another thing happened. It was about a lady. Her name was Marteville, the widow of an ambassador. Now this is going to blow your mind here. This widow, her husband had died 6 months before. And he had paid this goldsmith to do some work for him. A goldsmith, that was some expensive stuff. So you had somebody to do some goldsmith stuff for you. And he had this man to do some goldsmith, some silver things that he had this goldsmith to do named Kroon. So after he died, Kroon came back to the widow. And widow mean love without his wisdom. Her wisdom had died, and she was there. And Kroon had came back to try to get her to pay pay for this goldsmith work over again. And it would have cost her a small fortune to pay for it. But if she couldn't find this receipt, then she was going to have to pay it over again. So she had heard about Emanuel Swedenborg. And when Emanuel Swedenborg came through the city, she said, Mr. Swedenborg, can I ask you for a favor? He said, what? She said, if you can really talk to the individuals in the next world, would you talk to my husband and find out if he paid this man and if that was a receipt? Emanuel Swedenborg said he would do it. And the next time he was in the spiritual world, he did see this woman's husband. And he talked to her. And he told her about what was happening with his wife, with his ex-wife, and with his widow. And he told Emanuel Swedenborg there's a bureau upstairs, and it's a drawer, and that receipt is in that drawer. And she was having a gathering the next time Emanuel Swedenborg came to the city, and he made it his business to go over so he could tell her exactly what the receipt was. So he went in, and there was about 15 people there. They was gathering, just like people do. They have parties and stuff like that, and they had a gathering about 15 people there. And Emanuel Swedenborg went in, and he told her that he had talked to her husband, and he had told her that the receipt was in a bureau drawer upstairs, the second drawer. And she said, no, it's not up there. I've looked so many times before, and it's not there. He said, it's a secret panel on the left side that when you pull it out, you can slide that panel back, and the receipt would be there. So everybody was excited. They went upstairs to see, and sure enough, they pulled out the drawer, and she found that little secret compartment and slid it back, and there was the receipt there. Now, how could he do that unless he knew and had talked to the man that had put the receipt in the drawer and had the secret pass? He didn't know these people from Adam. He had never met these people before. But yet, she had confidence enough to ask him to go and do that for her. And he did do it. And he found the receipt. That made him even more famous out all over Europe that he had done this. And another time he did it for a queen of Sweden. He told her, that he would talk to her brother the next time that he went over in the spiritual world. And he did talk to her brother. He was the Prince of Prussia before he had died. And they had a secret between them that only the queen knew, and her brother, who was the Prince of Prussia before he died. And that was a secret. So when he came back from talking to the brother over there, he went to the queen, and she was having a gathering, and he went right straight up to the queen, and he told her that he had talked to her brother, and he told her this secret that was only between her and her brother. And she almost fainted when he told her that. But he didn't tell anybody else because she didn't want the secret to be known what she had wrote her. She had wrote her brother a letter. And they was at war. Sweden and Prussia was at war. And if she would have been caught communicating with anybody in Prussia, it would have been like treason. It would have been like sedition. Her communicating with the enemy. And that's what she had done, and that was the secret. And Emanuel Swedenborg had found it out from her brother in the spiritual world and came back and told her about it. That made him even more famous. And after a while, people began to believe that, hey, this was Emanuel Swedenborg, and he was really could be able to be in the spiritual world. I'm just going to name a few people that was Swedenborgians and that was changed. Like, you don't know that the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence was written by a Swedenborgian. Thomas Jefferson, he had read the writings of Emanuel Swedenborg. And the individual that created Chicago, the architect, he was a Swedenborgian. Abraham Lincoln had studied with some Swedenborgians. And he had learned that no man should be a slave. You can't be that. That's why he was so adamant. I got some people up on the up there like John Bigelow, American statesman. He said that he don't believe anybody when they say anything about the spiritual world except Emanuel Swedenborg. And Helen Keller, I know y'all all heard of her. She was one of Emanuel Swedenborg's biggest fans, and she was blind and deaf. And you might have seen the movie that she made. But she became a famous woman and did all kind of stuff because she had read the writings of Emanuel Swedenborg. Who else is up there? Robert Frost. He was a Swedenborgian. And one of the most famous one, I remember we learned about him in school, was Johnny Appleseed. Remember him? That he would go out all over the United States planting apples. But something else he was doing at the same time, he was taking parts of the writings of Emanuel Swedenborg out throughout the land so people could know that there was more than what they had been getting out of the churches and out of the Bible and stuff. Now I'm going to save the most famous person that everybody knows who didn't know he knew anything about Emanuel Swedenborg was Martin Luther King. Can you imagine that? I knew that he had something special about him and knew. And he had read some of the writings the writings of Emanuel Swedenborg. And while he was at Morehouse College. And he did. And that's why he knew that he had this job to do, was to lead the Black Americans out of the ignorance they was in about their rights. And that's what he did. And he didn't mind dying. That's all I got to share, and I'm anxious to move on. Hello, neighbor. My name is Robert J. Ray. I'm a professional counseling therapist and trainer of trainers. I worked in a mental health prison for 11 years. I have fixed a lot of broken men and women in my 45 years as a counseling therapist. I was born in Meridian, Mississippi and graduated from the famous T.J. Harris High School in 1963. T.J. Harris played Brinkley and Jim Hill in football and basketball every year before that stumbling block of integration dissembled the black race. I ran for mayor of Meridian in 2021. I ran for governor of Mississippi in 2019. I'm Robert J. Ray, the man with all of the answers, every Monday at 4 p.m. Watch me on We Believe.